Oregon, deep autumn, a forest so dense the light barely reaches the ground. Somewhere in the middle of it, nearly 40 miles from the nearest town, a cabin sits alone in a clearing. Weathered logs, rusted roof, weeds grown past the windows, no sign that anyone is home. Inside, the wide plank floors are cold and still. 3 boards in front of the stone fireplace sit slightly lower than the rest, a detail most people would never notice. Someone has been looking for those boards for months. What they've been looking for is beneath them: an iron hatch, a staircase, an underground research facility 40 feet below the earth, built in secret, over 20 years still running. Worth $200 million, 3 black SUVs just turned onto the gravel track, and the girl who found it, 19 years old, $32 to her name, hasn't come back up yet. The number never changed. That was the thing about checking your bank account every morning. You already knew what the number was. You checked it anyway. Some kind of ritual, some kind of punishment, some kind of proof that the day before had actually happened and wasn't just a bad dream you could shake off if you tried hard enough. Lena Marsh checked it every morning, sitting in the driver's seat of a 2009 Honda Civic that smelled like old French fries and something she refused to identify in the back seat. Screen brightness all the way down to save battery. Thumb hovering over the app. $32, not $320, not $32,000. 32, the kind of number that made grocery stores into math problems, the kind of number that made a cup of gas station coffee feel like a decision. She was 19 years old, and she was so tired of being 19 years old. The parking lot she'd slept in was behind a library in a small town she'd stopped in because she couldn't drive any further. Oregon in October. Gray sky, wet pavement, the smell of pine and cold rain coming through the crack she'd left in the window because sleeping in a sealed car made her feel like she was in a coffin, which, not a great metaphor. Moving on, she'd been in this parking lot 2 nights. The library opened at 9. She used the bathroom to wash her face and the outlets to charge her phone and the free Wi-Fi to apply for jobs that never called back. The librarian was a woman in her 50s who hadn't said anything about the car yet, but had twice left a paper cup of coffee on the table near Lena without making eye contact. That kind of kindness was the worst, because it was real and because you couldn't do anything with it except feel it and say thank you and then go back to your car with $32. Her mother had died 3 years ago, slowly and then all at once, the way her mother had done everything, with more drama at the end than the beginning deserved. Her father had been gone before that, not dead, just gone, which was somehow worse because it implied a decision had been made, and the few relatives who existed had been very good at existing somewhere else entirely. So, Lena Marsh, 19, $32, a car that probably needed an oil change 6,000 miles ago, and a phone that was currently at 14% battery because she'd forgotten to plug it in before she fell asleep last night, which was when it rang. Unknown number. She never answered unknown numbers. Too many debt collectors for debts that technically belonged to her mother and technically also to her now because the world was fair like that. So she watched it ring and ring and ring, and then it stopped, and then it rang again and again. Okay, fine, okay. Hello, is this Lena Marsh? A man's voice, professional, measured, the voice of someone who had given difficult news before and understood the value of going slowly. Who's asking? My name is Philip Croft. I'm an attorney in Crestfall, Oregon. I've been trying to reach you for several days." She looked at the clock. 7:43. The library wasn't open yet. "What kind of attorney?" "Estate attorney. Ms. Marsh, I represent the estate of Vera Marsh, your grandmother." Lena went very still. "She died 3 months ago," Philip Croft said. "I'm sorry. I assumed you may have been notified." She hadn't been. No one had told her, which either meant no one knew how to reach her or no one had thought to. Both options were equally plausible. Both options felt exactly the same. "I didn't know," she said. A pause. "She left you her property, a cabin and the surrounding land, nearly 40 acres in the Cascade foothills north of Crestfall." Another pause. "There are some matters that require your attention rather urgently." Lena looked at the $32 on her phone screen. "How urgently?" "I would say quite urgently, Ms. Marsh." "Yes." 5 hours north on Route 26, then left onto a state road, then left again onto something that barely counted as a road and had a sign that said, "Private no trespassing," that someone had shot at with what she hoped was a BB gun. 5 hours during which she thought about the grandmother she had met exactly twice. Once when she was 4, once when she was 8, both times brief, both times in the parking lot of a diner somewhere outside Portland, her mother driving her mother tense. In the particular way she got tense when something cost her, something she didn't want to pay. The woman across the table had been quiet, gray-haired, watching Lena in a way that Lena had found strange as a child and couldn't now explain as an adult, like she was trying to memorize something. After the second visit, Lena had asked her mother why they didn't see Grandma Vera more. Her mother had said it's complicated. Her mother had said that about a lot of things. The forest thickened as she drove north. The sky got lower. The road got smaller. She passed a rusted mailbox with the name Marsh, still visible in faded black paint, and turned onto a gravel track that disappeared into Douglas firs, so large they blocked out what was left of the afternoon light. And then the cabin appeared. She sat in the car for a moment. Because she needed a moment. It was not what the word cabin suggested. Cabin suggested something rustic and cozy. Flannel blankets, mugs of something warm, the kind of place where you put on wool socks and watch snow fall. This was weathered logs that had gone gray, a porch with 2 broken boards, shutters hanging at angles that suggested the screws had given up professionally, a metal roof with a rust pattern that looked like a map of somewhere. Tall weeds had taken over everything within reach. The chimney had moss on it. The whole structure had a slight lean to the left, like it was tired and considering sitting down. And it was hers, sort of, apparently. Philip Croft was already there, a man in his mid-50s in a practical rain jacket that said he'd been driving to rural properties for 20 years and had learned to dress accordingly. He shook her hand. He looked at her the way people who delivered difficult news looked at you before they delivered the rest of it. "It's better inside," he said, which was technically true. The inside was not good, but it was better. Stone fireplace taking up most of one wall, wide plank floors that were solid under her feet despite the dust, furniture covered in sheets like a house in a movie where someone has been away a long time, 3 bedrooms, a kitchen with a wood stove and a hand pump over the sink, the kind of construction that had been built to last 200 years and had managed most of it. She walked through slowly. Philip Croft didn't rush her. She ran her hand along the fireplace stones, old, the mortar between them smooth from decades of palms, doing the same thing. She wondered how many times Vera Marsh had stood in this exact spot. There's something else, Philip said when she'd made the circuit and come back to the main room. He held out a ring of keys and an envelope, her name on the front, handwritten, small, careful cursive, for Lena, just that. She gave this to me 2 years ago, Philip said. She asked that I give it to you in person, not mail it, not leave it for you to find. He paused. She was specific about that. Lena took the envelope. She did not open it yet. You said there were urgent matters, she said. His expression shifted, the delivery of difficult news preparation coming back. Why don't you sit down, he said. She sat. He explained the estate, the 40 acres, the cabin in clear ownership through Vera's will, and then he explained the other thing, the thing that made his voice go careful and his hands fold together on the table in front of him in the way of a man organizing his thoughts before he said something that was going to land hard. The Sloan Resources offer, $60,000, then $80,000, then $120,000, all 3 offers made to Vera in her last year of life. All 3 refused. They're persistent, Lena said. Exceptionally, said Philip, and they have very good attorneys. He drove away at 4 o'clock, leaving her the keys and a business card and the instruction to call him the moment anything felt wrong, which was a strange thing to say to someone standing alone in a remote cabin they'd just inherited, but she appreciated the specificity. She sat in the kitchen until the light went. Then she opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages. The handwriting was the same careful cursive as the envelope, the kind of penmanship you learned in school and kept because you cared about things. She read it by the light of a lantern she found in a kitchen cabinet already filled with oil, the way someone filled a lantern when they expected it to be needed. Vera had thought of everything. The letter started, "If you're reading this, then life probably became hard before it became better. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for many things. I don't know where to start, so I'll start with what's most important. Do not sell this cabin. Do not sell this land, no matter what anyone offers you, and no matter how good the offer sounds, and no matter what they say about the property or about me. You will get offers. They will be generous. They will seem like solutions. They are not solutions." Stay. Lena sat with that word for a moment. Stay. Nobody had ever told her to stay anywhere. In her experience, the instruction had always been the opposite. There is something I need you to find. Something Roy, your grandfather, spent most of his life building. Something I have spent most of my life protecting. It is beneath the cabin, beneath the fireplace specifically. The floorboards in front of the stone hearth, 3 of them to the left of center, will lift up if you look carefully. What you find there will explain everything I haven't been able to say. She read the rest. It was not long. It was mostly, I know this is strange. I know you have questions. I know I wasn't there. I know. The last paragraph said, trust the floorboards. Trust Philip Croft. And please, please don't trust anyone who comes to you with a very good reason to sell before you've had time to think. She folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, looked at the fireplace, looked at the floorboards in front of it, 3 of them to the left of center. Not yet, not tonight. Tonight she was tired and she hadn't eaten since the gas station sandwich at 2 o'clock, and she needed to sleep in an actual room for the first time in 6 weeks. She was going to be practical about this, which lasted until she was lying in the smallest bedroom on a mattress that was surprisingly not terrible, and staring at a ceiling in the dark and thinking someone spent their life building something under this floor. Sleep was not practical. Sleep took about 2 hours to arrive. The men came the next morning. She heard the truck before she saw it. Diesel engine, too large for the gravel track, coming fast for someone who didn't know the road. She was drinking coffee, actual coffee, because she'd found a hand grinder and a bag of beans in the kitchen cabinet, and whoever had been here last had excellent taste in coffee, which told her something about Vera when the truck pulled up outside. Two men, expensive truck, expensive clothes, smiles that had been calibrated specifically for situations where they needed someone to say yes. "Good morning," the first one said. He introduced himself as a representative of a regional land development company. He had a card, printed on thick paper, the kind that said, "We spend money on things because we have money. You just inherited this property," he said. "Congratulations, and we'd like to make your morning even better." The offer was $80,000, which, okay, she had $32 in her bank account. The word yes formed immediately in the back of her brain, the way yes to money always formed immediately in the brain of someone who had $32, clear and automatic and certain. And then she thought about the letter. Do not sell, no matter what anyone offers. "No, thank you," she said. The man's smile didn't change. "The property needs significant work. I know. And the location is fairly remote, I notice. And we're offering above market value for—" "I said no thank you," Lena said. "I appreciate you coming all the way out here." She did not invite them inside. She stood on the broken porch and watched them leave. Then she went back to her coffee and sat with the strange feeling of having said no to $80,000. It felt insane. It also felt, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, like the right thing. They were back 2 days later. Different man, same truck, same smiles, different number, 120,000. She said no. He left a card. Sloan Resources, Regional Acquisitions. She'd seen that name in Philip Croft's office in the conversation about persistent offers to Vera. She called Philip. "How long have they been trying to buy this land?" she said. A pause on his end. "A long time," he said. "Vera refused every offer for nearly 20 years. In the last 2 years, they became more aggressive in their approach." "What does that mean?" "It means they hired lawyers." "She had you?" "Yes. I've been representing this property for 15 years. He paused again. "Have they approached you?" "Twice. Second offer was 120. Silence for a moment. "I would strongly suggest you take some time before making any decisions." "I already said no." Another pause. This one had a different quality, the kind that meant he was deciding something. "Good," he said finally. "That's good, Lena." She was cleaning the kitchen on the 4th day when the car arrived. Not a truck this time, a sedan. Dark. A man in a suit that was wrong for the county, wrong for the mud track, wrong for everything about where she was standing. He had a briefcase, not a sales call, a legal call. He introduced himself with a name she immediately forgot. He represented Sloan Resources' legal department. He was sorry for the inconvenience. He understood she had just inherited this property, and he respected the difficulty of her situation. Then he opened the briefcase. The document was 7 pages, dense legal text, property transfer agreement, with Vera Marsh's signature on the last page, dated 6 months before Vera died. "Your grandmother signed a preliminary transfer agreement before her passing," the man said. His voice was smooth, the voice of someone who had done this before and expected it to work. "The property was conditionally transferred to Sloan Resources pending final probate. Our attorneys believe the will you've inherited may conflict with that prior agreement. There will be a hearing." He set a card on the porch railing. 3 days from now, he said, at the Crestfall County Courthouse, you'll want legal representation. He got back in his car. He drove away. Lena stood on the porch holding 7 pages of legal text with her grandmother's signature on the bottom. She read it. She was not a lawyer. She did not know property law, but she knew what a signature looked like when someone signed their own name versus when someone signed someone else's name. She had worked reception at 3 different offices and had handled more signed documents than she could count. Vera Marsh's signature was careful cursive. The signature on the transfer agreement was careful cursive, but not the same careful cursive. The loops were different. The pressure on the pen was different. The way the V connected to the E was different. Small differences, the kind you might miss if you were looking at the document for content rather than for craft. She called Philip Croft. Has anyone told you about a preliminary transfer agreement? The silence this time was different from all the previous silences. Say that again, he said. She said it again. He was at the cabin within 2 hours. He read the document standing at the kitchen table with his reading glasses on and his expression doing something complicated that she was watching very carefully. This is a forgery, he said. I thought so. I've represented Vera for 15 years. I have her signature on hundreds of documents. This is not her signature. He looked up. This is also very well done. What does that mean for the hearing? It means we have 72 hours to counter it with the original documentation from Vera's estate. He set the document down. I have everything I need in my files. The will is clear and properly witnessed and executed, but Sloane's attorneys are very good, and they will argue the prior agreement takes precedence. He took off his glasses. We can win this, but I want you to understand what we're dealing with. 60-year-old company trying to steal a woman's land, Lena said. Yes. Using a forged document they filed after she died so she couldn't contest it. That's my assessment, yes. And my grandmother knew this was coming. He looked at her for a long moment. I believe she prepared for it, he said. Yes. After he left, she stood in the main room for a while. Then she went to the fireplace. Not yet. She wasn't going to look yet. Not until she understood what she was walking into. Not until she'd thought about it properly. But she crouched down and looked at the floorboards. 3 of them. To the left of center. She put her hand on the middle one, just held it there. She found it that evening. Not the hatch. The other thing. The thing that told her someone had been in this cabin after her grandmother died and before she arrived. It started with the kitchen drawer. She was looking for a spoon. She'd only found forks so far, which was the kind of minor inconvenience that somehow felt like the last straw when you were also dealing with a forged deed and a 72-hour deadline. And she opened the 3rd drawer from the left. Inside, dish towels folded, a rubber band ball, a candle, a small notepad with a grocery list from years ago. She almost closed it. Except the dish towels were folded in a specific way, the kind of specific that spoke of habit, thirds then halves. Her mother had folded dish towels the same way drilled into her by her own mother probably, but the top towel had been refolded differently. She almost talked herself out of it. It was a dish towel. She'd opened the drawer herself and maybe disrupted it, except she hadn't touched the dish towels. She opened every drawer in the kitchen. She looked at everything with new eyes. The canister of flour on the counter, the lid was on correctly, but the flour near the edge had been disturbed and resettled, the kind of settled again texture that happened when someone replaced a lid carefully but not perfectly. The bookshelf in the main room had books in a specific order. that suggested they'd been taken down and returned, but one of them was half an inch further out than the others, the way it would be if someone had been looking behind them. The wood pile by the back door had been partially restacked, good restacking, but the older pieces now on top had the kind of dust distribution that said they'd been on the bottom before. This was a professional search. Someone who knew what they were doing had come through this cabin after Vera died and before Lena arrived, and had looked for something carefully, thoroughly, and had not found it, because if they'd found it, there would be no forged deed, no escalating offers, no 72-hour legal deadline. They were still looking. Lena sat on the kitchen floor. What do you do when you're 19 years old and you have $32 and someone just tried to steal your inheritance with a forged document, and someone else has been professionally searching the house you're living in? What do you do when your dead grandmother left you a letter about floorboards? She sat with the options. Option 1, call Philip Croft. Tell him about the search. Let the lawyers sort it out. Option 2, take the $80,000 or the $120,000 or whatever they offered next. Option 3, look at the floorboards. She'd been practical her whole life. Practical about her mother's illness. Practical about the apartment she couldn't afford after the funeral. Practical about the jobs that didn't work out and the relatives who weren't there, and the $32 and the car with the unidentified smell, and every single morning of the last 3 years that had been about survival and nothing else. She was very tired of being practical. She stood up. She walked to the fireplace. 3 boards, left of center. She pressed the middle one, the same hollow sound she'd heard in the back of her mind since she first crouched down here there. Real, not her imagination, not the wood settling or the house breathing. Hollow. She found the pry bar in the workshop lean-to behind the cabin, old but solid, the kind of tool that had been used regularly and cared for. She came back inside. She crouched down. She fit the pry bar under the edge of the first board and stopped. She could not have explained why she stopped. Not yet. She was not afraid exactly. It was something closer to what she imagined it felt like before you jumped off something high into water, that suspended moment where your brain is still running the numbers and your body is already committed, and the only direction is forward. Whatever was down there had been built by a man named Roy Marsh, who had died 8 years ago. Whatever was down there had been protected by a woman named Vera Marsh for her entire adult life. Whatever was down there had survived a professional search by people who wanted it badly enough to forge a legal document. And whatever was down there had been left for her, for Lena. Specifically, the pry bar was in her hands. The floorboard was under the bar. She pulled. The board came up with a sound like a door that has been closed a very long time, finally being opened. The second board came up easier, the third easier still. Cold air drifted upward, and beneath them a steel hatch, set into the floor, iron ring fitted into the center. The metal was old but well maintained, the hinges coated in something that kept them from rusting. She gripped the ring, pulled. The hatch resisted for a moment, then gave. Cold air rushed up against her face. Below the hatch, a staircase, stone steps, spiraling down into darkness. Lena sat back on her heels. Her heart was doing something she had no word for. Not fear, not excitement. Something between the two that had its own weather entirely. She went to get the flashlight. The stairs went down farther than made sense. That was the first thing. The flashlight beam hit stone steps, curved left, hit more stone steps. She counted as she went. 10, 20. The air got cooler but not cold, not the damp cold of a basement. Something else, something dry, and even the way the inside of a mountain felt if you'd ever been inside one. She hadn't actually been inside a mountain until now. Apparently, 30 steps, 35, 40. She stopped counting. The stairs opened into a room. Except room was the wrong word. Room implied a ceiling you could identify. Room implied walls at a reasonable distance. Room implied a space that fit inside the floor plan of the building above it. This was none of those things. This was a chamber, high enough that her flashlight beam hit the ceiling at 15 feet, and then she tilted it higher and found another 10 feet of carved and reinforced stone above that, wide enough that the light struggled to reach the far wall. She turned slowly, and the beam traveled and finally hit concrete and steel shelving running floor to ceiling on 3 sides. On those shelves, equipment, and on the center panel, a bank of monitors. 8 of them, dark frames except one. One monitor was on. Lena stood completely still. The single active monitor showed she had to cross the room to see it clearly, a graph, a slow-moving graph of lines and numbers updating in real time. The numbers meant nothing to her yet, but the updating did. This equipment was powered. This equipment was running, which meant the ceiling. She looked up at the ceiling, a ventilation shaft. She could see it now that she was looking for it, a dark slot in the stone at the far end of the chamber near where the wall met the ceiling, and beside it, almost invisible, a wire running along the stone and disappearing up. Solar panels somewhere above her on the property, power running down through the wire into the station and keeping one monitor alive and one pump humming. She could hear it now, a low, even sound beneath everything, the sound of water moving through pipes in the walls. Someone had designed the system to run indefinitely without maintenance. It had been running indefinitely. For how long? She didn't know yet. She didn't know anything yet. She found the main power panel on the left wall, a real panel, breakers and switches labeled in the same careful handwriting. As she stopped, she took out the letter from her pocket, held it next to the panel labels. Same person, same handwriting. Roy Marsh had labeled every breaker himself. She flipped the main switch, and the room came to life. The 8 monitors came on in sequence, most of them showing graphs the same kind of slowly updating lines as the single active one, but more of them now, more detailed data she couldn't read yet. One monitor showed a camera feed, exterior, grainy but clear enough, the gravel track, the cabin, the weeds, her car, the lights overhead, industrial fixtures bolted to the stone ceiling, came on amber and then brightened to white. And in the actual light of the room, she saw it fully for the first time. The scale of it. The main chamber was roughly 60 feet across. The concrete and steel shelving held equipment she'd need Roy's journals to identify. In the center, a large work table with 2 stools, both tucked in neatly, the way someone pushed in a chair when they left a place they intended to return to. Along the right wall, a corridor opened into more rooms. She could see doors, actual doors, metal fitted into stone frames. Lena stood in the middle of the main chamber and turned a full circle. Roy Marsh had built this, alone, over 20 years, under a cabin in the Cascade foothills, while the world went about its business above him and thought he was just a retired hydrologist who liked his privacy. He hadn't been retired. He'd been working down here in the dark for decades. She didn't know whether to be in awe or terrified. Both. Definitely both. She went left first. The archive room was smaller than the main chamber. The walls were lined with shelving metal, deep organized, with the precision of someone who understood that information was worth more than furniture. Binders with labeled spines, rolled maps stored in cardboard tubes, flat files stacked in metal drawers, a long work table down the center with a magnifying lamp still in its folded position waiting, and on the end of the table a row of leather journals, not one, not three, 11, numbered on the spines in the same handwriting, volume 1 through volume 11. Lena picked up volume 11, the last one, the most recent. She opened to the last entry with writing in it. The date was 8 years and 2 months ago, a month before Roy died. The handwriting was harder to read than the label handwriting, smaller, more urgent. The handwriting of a man writing fast because he wasn't sure how much time he had. She sat on the stool, and she read. He had found it in 1985, or more precisely, they had found it. Roy Marsh and Gerald Sloan, two young hydrologists on contract with a regional land trust doing routine subsurface survey work in the Cascade foothills. Standard work, grid pattern, instruments, nothing that should have been interesting until the instruments said something impossible. The aquifer sat beneath 40,000 acres of private and protected land north of Crestfall, deeper than anything in the region, fed by snowmelt channels that ran through porous volcanic rock, filtered to a purity that the instruments read and reread because the numbers seemed wrong, an underground freshwater system of a scale that hadn't been discovered in Oregon since the 1940s, the Marsh Creek Aquifer. Roy had named it in his journal before the survey was even finished. Marsh Creek, the small stream on the surface. Above it, the stream that ran past the property he'd recently bought with Vera. He named it that because he found it, because that was how naming worked. Gerald Sloan had different ideas. Lena turned the pages slowly. Roy's journals were not dramatic. They were the journals of an engineer and a scientist, precise, measured, documented. But the story they told was not precise or measured or easy to document. Sloan had gone to their employer before Roy could file his findings, had presented the discovery as primarily his own, had used language in his report that put Roy's name in a footnote. Roy had objected. The employer had backed Sloan. Roy had documented the original survey data and filed it with the state, but Sloan had already established the narrative, and narratives moved faster than documentation in rooms full of people who hadn't been there. Roy left the contract work, came back to Vera and the cabin and 40 acres of land that sat above one of the largest private freshwater systems in the state. Sloan went into business. That was Volume 2, written in the late 1980s. Lena opened Volume 3. Roy had understood even then what was coming. He'd been a scientist long enough to know what clean water meant. Not in 1985 necessarily. In 1985, most people still assumed clean water was simply water. But he could read the trajectory, population growth, industrial demand, climate patterns. He had run the numbers, and the numbers had pointed to a future in which water wasn't just valuable, it was everything. She turned to a section near the back of Volume 3 where Roy had compiled the valuation projections, 3 pages of his careful engineering notation. At the bottom of the 3rd page, underlined twice the current estimated value of water rights associated with the Marsh Creek Aquifer, a number that the State Geological Office had independently verified the year before Roy died. $200 million. She read it a second time, then a third, $200 million. Sitting under 40 acres of Oregon forest, under a cabin with a rusted roof and a porch with 2 broken boards and weeds growing up to the windows. Under her, she put the journal down, picked it back up, put it down again. Okay. She needed a moment. She was taking a moment. She picked it back up. So he had started building, not a vault, not a safe, a research station, fully equipped, self-powered, designed to operate independently for decades if necessary. The kind of facility a university might build on a grant, except Roy had built it with his own hands and his own money over the course of 20 years, quietly working in the hours he had, telling no one, protecting the data, protecting the ownership records, protecting the evidence, because Sloan hadn't stopped. Volume 4 through 7 was the slow creep of Gerald Sloan's approach over 20 years. Sloan Resources, the company he'd founded in the late 90s, had purchased surrounding land parcel by parcel, had applied for water rights permits in areas adjacent to the Marsh Creek aquifer boundary, had sent representatives to Roy twice, then 4 times with offers, polite at first, less polite later. Roy had said no, each time, without elaboration, no. But in Volume 6, his handwriting changed. Lena noticed it, the way you noticed when someone's voice changed on the phone, the same words, different quality underneath. The entries got shorter, the technical notes became fewer, and between the data entries, a different kind of writing started appearing. Personal, worried. Vera thinks I should let the lawyers handle it entirely. She may be right, but the lawyers can only work with what they're given, and what they're given only matters if it's protected. The station is the protection. If anything happens to me, the station is the only reason any of this survives. Volume 7. Sloan's company has been buying agricultural properties through shell corporations. Our neighboring parcels to the north and east are now functionally controlled by entities I believe trace back to SR. I cannot prove this yet. I am trying. Volume 8. The new approach is more sophisticated. They have found a firm that specializes in property dispute litigation. They file claims. The claims are without merit, but they cost money to contest, and they create delays, and delays are, I think, the actual objective. Vera is exhausted. I am exhausted. But there is a point to this. The point is that 40,000 acres of the cleanest freshwater system in the state stays protected. I keep reminding myself of the point. Volume 9. Near the end, Vera has suggested I create what she calls a proper record. She means the personal kind, the kind that explains not just the data, but the story behind the data. She says if something happens to either of us, Lena should be able to understand not just what it is, but why it mattered. She mentioned Lena by name. This is the first time she has done that in years. I think she is preparing herself for something. I do not ask what. Lena stopped reading. She put the journal down very carefully, the way you put something down when your hands weren't entirely steady. Lena, her name, in handwriting from 9 years ago, in a journal she'd never been meant to see until now. He had known about her. He had known her name, and Vera had been preparing for something for at least 9 years, quietly, in the background, while Lena was 11 years old and living in a succession of other people's houses and not knowing any of this existed. She picked the journal back up. The corridor on the right side of the main chamber had 3 doors. The first, communications room, compact, a satellite uplink system that took her a moment to identify because she'd only ever seen them in movies: a radio unit, a desktop computer mounted to the wall in a custom bracket, all of it old by current standards but maintained, clean, functional. The second door, the evidence vault. This one required a combination she didn't have yet, a dial lock, old style, built into the door itself. She made a note to look for the combination in the journals. The third door was different from the others. She noticed it because the other two were metal, industrial utilitarian, the same gray as the rest of the facility. This door was wood, dark wood, set into the stone frame with care, the kind of joinery that took time. The handle was brushed copper, worn smooth with use, no lock. She opened it. The room inside was small, 12 feet by 12 feet maybe, low ceiling. The walls had been finished, not raw stone but plaster painted a pale yellow that had faded to something closer to cream. In the corner, an armchair, old but well made, the kind that had been recovered at some point by someone who knew what they were doing. A small table beside it with a reading lamp. A bookshelf on the left wall with actual books, not technical references, actual books, novels, poetry. One shelf of what looked like photograph albums. And on the back wall, at eye level, a small framed inscription carved directly into the stone before the plaster was applied. So it had been there from the beginning, the first thing before the paint, before the furniture, before anything else. For Vera and the family, we will keep safe. Lena stood in the doorway for a long time. The room smelled faintly of something, not dust, something else. A perfume, maybe old and faint, the ghost of something worn regularly in a space for years. She crossed to the bookshelf. The photograph albums were on the second shelf, 3 of them, the same faded yellow as the walls. She picked up the first one. She opened it, and her hands went very still. The photographs were of her, school photos, candid shots taken from a distance, a birthday party she remembered vaguely, age 7, a neighbor's backyard, a school play she'd been in at 9. She'd been a tree, which was not a speaking role, but she'd been very committed to it. A photo of her outside, what she recognized as the 3rd apartment she'd lived in after her mother died, taken from the street, her sitting on the front steps doing homework. She didn't know who had taken these. She didn't want to know exactly. She knew enough. Vera had kept a record of her at a distance, always at a distance, but consistently, carefully over years. She set the photo album down. On the desk beside the chair, she'd missed it because she was looking at the photos, a wooden box, flat, the kind used for documents. She opened it. Inside envelopes, 13 envelopes, stacked neatly, each one labeled, not with dates, with ages, for Lena age 6, for Lena age 7, for Lena age 8, all the way to 13, for Lena age 18. Lena sat down in the armchair. She picked up the first envelope. The glue had dried with age, but the flap lifted easily. Inside, a single folded page. Lena, today you turn 6. I don't know where you are right now. I have someone who checks on you and tells me you are safe. This is the most important thing. I want more for you than safe. I want you well and happy and known, but right now safe is what I can give you. I know you don't remember meeting me. You were very small. You had your mother's eyes, and you kept stealing my bread roll at the diner table, and you acted completely unaware that this was unusual behavior. Happy birthday, my girl. I am thinking about you today. I will be thinking about you today every year. She read all 13. She was not going to describe what that was like. There were no words for what that was like. There were only the envelopes in her lap and the armchair that smelled faintly of an old perfume, and the inscription on the wall that said, "For the family we will keep safe," and the photograph albums, and the fact that someone had been watching out for her from a distance for 13 years, and she hadn't known. She had thought she was alone. She had been wrong. That was the thing she kept coming back to, the thing that restructured everything she'd believed about her own life. She had thought she was alone. She had been wrong. When she finally stood up, her legs were unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with the stairs. She steadied herself on the door frame and breathed the slightly cool air of the corridor and tried to organize her thoughts into something functional. Okay, here is what she knew. Her grandfather had spent 20 years building an underground research facility to protect the evidence surrounding a major freshwater aquifer system worth $200 million. Her grandmother had spent every year since coming to a room in that facility on Lena's birthday and writing to her. Gerald Sloan had been trying to acquire that aquifer for 40 years, had stolen credit from her grandfather in 1985, had spent decades building a legal and corporate infrastructure around the land, and was now 3 months after Vera's death making his move with a forged document and a 72-hour deadline. And somewhere in this facility was the evidence vault, the second door, the combination lock that probably contained everything needed to stop him. She needed the combination. She went back to the archive room, volume 10. She opened it to the last entry. There, in Roy's handwriting. Not the combination itself, Roy was too careful for that, but a sentence that made the combination obvious once she had it. The numbers Vera uses for everything. The first 4 matter. Vera's date of birth. She didn't know it. She called Philip Croft. "I need Vera's birthday," she said. A pause. "Lena, where are you right now?" I found what she was talking about in the letter, the floorboards." A pause. "Philip, what she left behind is..." She stopped. She didn't have a word for it yet. What was her birthday? He told her. March 14th, 1951. She went to the second door. She dialed 0314. The lock released. The evidence vault was a single room, fireproofed the walls, lined with document storage, steel filing cabinets along 2 walls, a large safe in the corner open, which meant the documents inside it were accessible, which meant Vera had intended them to be accessible, which meant Vera had unlocked it at some point before she died. Inside the safe, a single envelope, thick, the kind used for important documents, and on the front, for the attorney, for the hearing. She was photographing it with her phone when Philip called back. "Lena," his voice had changed, "I need you to come out of wherever you are right now. Do it calmly." "What happened? Look at the exterior camera if you can." She walked back to the main chamber, to the security monitors. On the first exterior screen, the gravel track, the cabin, her car, and 3 black SUVs pulling onto the property. She watched them stop. She watched men step out. 4 of them, not the salesman, not the lawyer, men in clothes that said they were there for a purpose, and the purpose was not conversation. "Philip," her voice was steady. She noted this with distant surprise. "How far are you from here?" 40 minutes. "There's a second exit." She was already moving back toward the corridor. "I need to know, did you get the photos I sent of the documents?" "They're received. They're safe." "Good." She grabbed the envelope from the evidence vault, grabbed the 13 birthday letters from Vera's room, all of them, the wooden box and her flashlight and her phone charger and the copy of Roy's Volume 11 journal, because it was the most recent and the most important. "There's a tunnel," she said. "I think it exits somewhere on the north side of the property." "Who told you about the facility blueprints on the wall, Philip? How far is the county road from the north edge of the property?" "Less than a mile. There's a structure out there, an old ranger station. Abandoned. That's probably where it ends." She was walking. The corridor continued past Vera's room, further than she'd explored, farther into the dark. "Stay on the phone." "I'm staying on the phone." Above her, somewhere through 40 feet of stone and soil, she could hear the distant sound of a car door, then another, then footsteps on the cabin porch. Lena walked faster. The tunnel went north. She knew north because she'd studied the blueprints on the wall for 30 seconds before she started walking. Floor plan of the entire facility. Main chamber, archive room, communications, evidence vault, Vera's room, and then the corridor continuing past all of it into a passage marked on the blueprint with 2 words in Roy's handwriting: north exit. He had thought of everything. He really had thought of everything. The tunnel was rougher than the facility rooms, less finish, stone walls with timber supports at intervals, the kind of construction that said this part was practical, not permanent. Headroom varied. She had to duck twice. Once she stepped over a section of ground that was softer than the rest and made a sound she did not enjoy. Behind her, through the stone and soil and 40 feet of earth, she could hear nothing, which either meant nothing was happening or things were happening that couldn't reach her down here. She kept walking. The flashlight made a circle of yellow ahead of her. Beyond it, nothing. The tunnel had no end visible, just the dark accepting the light and giving nothing back. She was okay, not afraid. She checked the way you checked a phone signal in a bad area waiting for one bar to appear. No, not afraid. Something else, something tight and purposeful and oddly calm. The way she'd been calm that morning in her first grade classroom during a fire drill when all the other kids panicked and she'd been the one who pointed to the door and said, "That's how we go." And the teacher had looked at her with an expression she'd understood even at 6 as surprise. She kept walking, Philip's voice in her phone. "Still here, still walking," she said. "The Crestfall County Sheriff's Department has been notified about the unauthorized entry. How long does that take?" "It's already in process." A pause. "Lena, the documents you photographed, I have the originals." "The originals?" His voice did something. "You have in the envelope from the safe. I'm carrying them." A longer pause. "Vera was right about you," he said. She wanted to ask what that meant. She kept walking instead. The tunnel rose slightly in the last 100 yards. She could feel the grade change underfoot. The air shifted, still cool, but with something different in it. Not facility air, outside air coming in from somewhere ahead. And then her flashlight hit a door, wooden, old, a bar latch on her side. She lifted the bar, pushed. The door swung out into cold Oregon night, and she stepped out into the trees. The ranger station was 40 yards north of where she emerged, half hidden by firs that had grown up around it in the years since it was decommissioned. Small structure, one room from the look of it, a porch with a broken step, light in the window, light. She stopped. Someone was in there. Philip had said abandoned. She looked at the light. Steady. Not a phone, not a flashlight. A lamp. The kind of lamp that said someone had been here long enough to set up a lamp. She stood in the trees for a moment. Then she walked toward it because she had the documents and Philip on the phone and the toolbar of logic she'd assembled over the last hour, and the logic said whoever had maintained the facility for 3 months after Vera died had not been doing it to harm her, had been doing it to be ready, to hold the line until Lena arrived. She pushed open the door. The woman inside was sitting in a folding chair next to a camp lantern with a book open in her lap. She looked up when the door opened. She was 70-something, silver hair pulled back in a practical braid, warm jacket, the kind of face that had been both very kind and very stubborn for many decades and had settled into a combination of both simultaneously. She looked at Lena. She looked at the wooden box under Lena's arm, at the envelope, at the journal. She closed her book. "I was starting to wonder," the woman said. "Sit down. There's coffee on the camp stove. It's been sitting for 2 hours, so it's terrible, but it's hot." Her name was Bet Coleman. She'd known Vera Marsh for 32 years. "She moved out here when I was 40, Betty said. She poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it across the small table. "I was on the property to the east then. I had a goat problem. They kept getting through the fence line onto Vera's land. She fixed the fence herself. Didn't say a word to me about it, just fixed it. When I went over to apologize, she offered me coffee and told me the third post from the left was rotted and I should replace the whole east line before spring." "That sounds like her letter," Lena said. Betty smiled. She was a very practical woman, extremely practical. She wrapped her hands around her own cup. "And one of the kindest people I've ever known, which is not a combination you find often." Lena looked at the wooden box on the table. "She was in the facility," Lena said, "every year on my birthday." Betty was quiet for a moment. "She told me about it once," she said. "I didn't know about the room specifically. She didn't share everything. But she mentioned once that she had a place she went to remember you, to not pray exactly. She wasn't that kind of woman, but to sit with the fact of you, to make it real." She looked at Lena directly. She was afraid of what might happen to you if Sloane's company connected her directly to you. She was afraid of what might happen to you if anyone looked too hard at anyone near that land. A pause. She watched from a distance because she thought distance was the only safe thing she could give you. "I don't know if she was right." "She was right that they were dangerous," Lena said. "Yes. Whether she was right about the distance is a different question." Betty looked at her for a long moment. "She said almost that exact thing to me once," she said quietly, almost word for word. She picked up her coffee. "You have her way of looking at things." Philip arrived 40 minutes later. He had in 40 minutes apparently done several things simultaneously, which said something about what kind of attorney he was. He had filed an emergency motion to the Crestfall County Court regarding the forged transfer document. He had transmitted the photographs Lena had sent to a forensic documents expert he kept on retainer for exactly this kind of situation, and he had arranged for the original documents from the evidence vault to be received and secured before they reached the courthouse. He walked into the ranger station, took one look at the wooden box and the envelope and the journal on the table and sat down. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning," she told him. He listened without interrupting, which was a skill she appreciated more the longer she talked. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The combination was her birthday, March 14th, 1951. He smiled, not a lawyer's smile, something more personal. Of course it was. He picked up the envelope from the evidence vault and held it with the care of something that had been a long time coming. "Vera spent 8 years organizing this," he said. "Everything we need for tomorrow should be in here." He looked at Lena. "She planned for this exact scenario. She planned for the forged deed. There's a provision in the estate documentation specifically addressing third-party transfer claims filed after her death. She planned for the court hearing. She planned for the 72 hours. He set the envelope down carefully. She planned for you to find the facility. She planned for you to bring this out. She didn't plan on me almost not answering the phone, Lena said. Philip looked at her. Unknown number, she said. I almost let it go to voicemail. He was quiet for a moment. Then, she did mention that. In our last conversation, she said, he paused. She said you were stubborn and that she hoped that quality would hold. The hearing was at 9 the next morning. The Crestfall County Courthouse was a modest building in a modest town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the parking lot was never full. Sloan Resources had sent 3 attorneys. 3. For a property dispute in a rural county courthouse, which told her everything about what the property was worth. Philip Croft had come alone. She sat in the gallery because she wasn't a party to the immediate proceedings. She watched Philip set his files on the table, watched the 3 Sloan attorneys arrange their materials with the careful efficiency of people who were very confident they had already won. The judge was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and the expression of someone who had seen many things brought before her and had learned to be neither impressed nor alarmed by any of them. The Sloan attorneys presented the transfer agreement, clean copy properly formatted. They cited the signature. They cited the filing date. They cited 3 precedent cases in property dispute law that supported the validity of pre-death transfer agreements. Philip listened. He did not look at his phone. He did not look at Lena. He looked at the Sloan attorneys and listened with the focused attention of a man who already knew what was coming and was simply waiting for the right moment. When they finished, he stood. He submitted the forensic documents analysis, which had arrived at 6 that morning and contained 17 specific points of difference between the signature on the transfer agreement and Vera Marsh's verified signature on file with the state. He submitted the original estate documentation that Vera had executed 2 years prior, witnessed and notarized, containing a specific provision. Any claim of property transfer by a third party filed after my death shall require forensic signature verification before proceeding, as I have reason to believe such claims may be attempted. He submitted the deed of the property itself, clear and uncontested, in Vera Marsh's name, transferred in full to Lena Marsh. And then he submitted the certificate of authenticity from the evidence vault's document package, notarized by 2 independent attorneys at Vera's direction, establishing the provenance and integrity of the original estate documents. Vera had filed a roadblock for the forged deed before she died, not because she knew exactly what form the forgery would take, because she knew it was coming and had prepared for it anyway. The 3 Sloan attorneys had a brief, quiet conference at their table. The judge looked at them over her reading glasses. I'm hearing a motion to dismiss the third-party transfer claim, she said, not a question. The primary Sloan attorney stood. The signature discrepancy warrants investigation, Your Honor, but 17 points, the judge said. I've read the analysis. The claim is dismissed. She looked at her papers. Furthermore, given the specific provision in the estate documentation regarding anticipated fraudulent claims, I'm referring this matter to the county prosecutor's office for review of the document itself. She took off her glasses. Miss Marsh's inheritance is confirmed and uncontested. We're adjourned. 3 minutes. The whole thing had taken 3 minutes. Outside on the courthouse steps, Lena stood in the October sun and thought Vera had been preparing this for 8 years. 8 years of carefully documented provisions and witness signatures and forensic preparation, and it had taken 3 minutes to use. The thing about being ready was that readiness looked effortless from the outside. It never was. The investigation took longer than 3 minutes. Over the following weeks, the forensic analysis of the transfer document led to a chain of findings that went well beyond the forgery itself. Sloan Resources employed a paralegal firm that specialized in what the investigators eventually called aggressive property acquisition practices, which was a careful way of saying they created documents. The Crestfall forgery was not the first, nor, it turned out, the fifth, but the investigation into Sloan Resources' practices opened other doors. Philip brought her the additional findings on a Tuesday afternoon. He sat across the kitchen table in the cabin that smelled like fresh paint and wood smoke and the breakfast she'd made that morning, and he laid out the papers with the careful precision of a man who understood that some things needed to be delivered slowly. Roy's professional destruction had been systematic. She had read it in the journals in pieces. Now she had the documented version. Sloan had, beginning in 1987, filed 3 formal complaints against Roy Marsh's professional surveying license. All 3 complaints were unfounded. All 3 were ultimately dismissed, but the dismissals took years and legal fees. In 1993, Sloan's company had quietly worked with a state agency contact to restrict Roy's access to certain public survey databases, citing a technical licensing dispute that existed only on paper. The restriction had been reversed after 2 years, but 2 years of restricted access had delayed Roy's publication of the Marsh Creek aquifer data by enough time for Sloan to establish his own claims in adjacent territory. In 2001 and 2004 and 2008, Sloan Resources had filed civil lawsuits against Roy personally, 2 alleging improper use of survey data, 1 alleging defamation in a professional publication. All 3 were without merit. All 3 were eventually dismissed or settled. All 3 had cost money. All 3 had cost time. All 3 had been part of a strategy that had nothing to do with winning in court and everything to do with making Roy Marsh's life unendurable. Roy had kept working, had kept building the facility, had kept documenting, but the stress had accumulated the way it accumulated, the way it always accumulated when you were one person fighting an institution with unlimited resources and unlimited patience, the way it wore at the edges of things you thought were solid until one day something gave. His heart had given. At 63, none of this constitutes criminal liability for Roy's death, Philip said carefully. Legally, medically, the heart failure is attributed to natural causes. And actually, Lena said, he looked at her, 30 years of deliberate harassment, she said. Every time he got close to publishing another lawsuit, every time the data was ready, another obstacle, every time he thought he could wrest another thing to fight. She looked out the window. He was 63 years old. Philip didn't say anything. Vera knew, Lena said. Yes, she spent 8 years documenting every one of those cases, building the pattern. She looked at the papers. She wasn't just protecting the land, she was proving what it cost. Philip folded his hands on the table. The prosecutor's office has subpoenaed Sloan Resources' internal communications from the relevant periods, he said. The investigation into fraudulent property claims has expanded to include a review of the historical professional harassment cases. Gerald Sloan has retained private counsel. Good, Lena said. He's 72 years old, Philip said, not defending him, just noting it. Roy was 63, she said, and Vera was 81, and spent the last decade of her life building a legal case instead of just being a grandmother. He had no answer for that, nor should he have. She found the 14th letter on a Sunday afternoon in November. She had been back in the facility many times by then. The investigation had required access to the archives, and Philip's team had spent 2 weeks cataloging the documents in the evidence vault. The communications room had been assessed by a tech consultant who determined that the satellite uplink was still functional and expressed what could only be described as reverent disbelief. The main chamber's equipment had been reviewed by a hydrologist from Oregon State University who had looked at the monitoring data and then looked at it again and then asked very quietly if Roy Marsh had published any of this because it was extraordinary. He had not published it because he had been too busy fighting lawsuits, but the data was there, all of it, 40 years of it, waiting. On the Sunday afternoon in November, Lena was in Vera's room. She went there sometimes, not to read. She had read the letters many times now, all 13 of them, and she had them close to memorize in the way you memorize things that mattered. She went there because the room had the quality of a kept promise. The cream-colored walls, the armchair, the faint trace of something that had been worn here regularly over years. She was looking at the photograph albums again. She had looked at them many times. She was at the last page of the last album, which ended with a photo of her at 17 outside a community college where she'd taken an evening class because she thought she might want to study something and hadn't yet known what. When she noticed the back cover, the inside of the back cover was thicker than it should have been. She pressed her fingers to it. Paper, folded, inside the back cover, held in place by a small strip of tape that had aged to almost nothing. She pulled it free carefully. An envelope, no age label, just for Lena, the same handwriting as all the others. She held it for a moment, then she sat down in the armchair, and she opened it. The letter was 3 pages, smaller handwriting than the birthday letters, the handwriting of someone who had a lot to say and was aware of limited space. Lena, if you found this, then you found the room, and if you found the room, you've read the 13 letters, which means you know the most important thing. You were thought of every year, without exception, not as an obligation, not as a duty, as a joy that also hurt the way some joys do. I want to explain some things. Not to ask forgiveness, I don't think you owe me that. I think that's mine to sit with, but because I think you deserve to understand what happened and why I made the choices I made. Lena read slowly. The letter explained Sloane's first approach when Vera was in her 40s and Roy was still alive and still fighting, the lawsuit that had come to their door in 2001, the lawyer who had told them quietly that anyone connected to the Marsh property would be a legal target for as long as they fought. Roy had kept fighting. Vera had supported him. But when Lena's mother had gotten sick, when the trajectory became clear, when Vera had considered, if I contact my granddaughter directly, if I bring her into this, I make her a target. Roy said we should take the risk. I said we shouldn't. We disagreed on this the way we disagreed on very few things thoroughly and repeatedly and without resolution. Roy died before we decided. After he died, I decided alone. I decided wrong. Not about protecting you. I believe honestly that keeping you unknown to Sloane's people kept you safer than you would have been otherwise. But I decided wrong about what that cost. I thought distance was protection. I think now it was also cowardice. It was easier to love you from here in this room than to face what loving you would require. I write this 3 weeks before I expect to die. The doctors are giving me a timeline I believe is accurate. I have spent the last 8 years making sure that what Roy built and what I've protected will survive me. Philip knows everything. The facility holds everything, and you, wherever you are the point of all of it. This is not the life I would have chosen for you. I would have chosen different. I would have been at your school plays and your birthdays and the difficult evenings when you needed someone and there was no one. I was not there, but I want you to know that every year on your birthday, I was in this chair, and I was with you the way I knew how to be with you, which was the wrong way, but it was the only way I had figured out. The land is yours. The aquifer is yours. What Roy built is yours. But more than any of that, please hear this. You are the reason any of it mattered. Not the water rights, not the legal case, not the evidence vault. You. Happy birthday, my girl. Whichever birthday this reaches you, I love you. Vera. She sat in the armchair for a long time. The lamp on the side table put a circle of warm light on the cream-colored walls. The inscription above her read, "For Vera and the family, we will keep safe." Outside, through 40 feet of stone and soil and Oregon forests, the November sky was probably gray, probably cold. In here, it was exactly what it always was. She picked up the photograph album. She turned to the last page, the photo of her at 17, the last photo Vera had found. Then she took her phone out of her pocket. She turned the camera on herself, sat up straight. Outside light in the frame somehow, not the facility light, something warmer which made no sense, and she didn't question it. She took the photo. She printed it later at the pharmacy in Crestfall. 4x6. Matte. She came back to the room. She slipped it into the album sleeve next to the 17-year-old photo. Then she closed the album, and she sat in the chair that smelled faintly of an old perfume and looked at the inscription her grandfather had carved before anything else was built down here, before the shelves and the equipment and the evidence vault and the 30-year fight. For Vera and the family, we will keep safe. She was the family. She was the family, and she was here, and she was safe. She was home. For the first time in her life, in her entire 19 years of her life, she was completely, undeniably, simply home.